Angelica Hi, and welcome to episode 88 of Spurbs Herbs. Today we're going to be talking about an incredibly popular herb. One of my sources said it was the top 5, other sources top 10 herbs, Western herbs in the US and Europe, and that is saw palmetto or Serenoa repens, I believe is how it's pronounced. And without further ado, let's get into what that means. So today's episode, we'll be looking at another herb of the world, saw palmetto or Serenoa repens. This is a well-known herb used for over 2,000 years. So, when I wrote this blurb, I did a quick search and I found someone that said it was used for over 2,000 years. And my research probably wouldn't disagree with it, but I didn't quite get, as I did the whole episode, it wasn't quite 2,000 years. We'll talk about that as we talk about the history of this herb, but it's certainly been used for quite a long while. It has a modern reputation for treating prostatic hyperplasia or enlarged prostate. As always, we will do our deep dive into this herb and look at its traditional uses and its preparation, interactions, and cautions, and see if the science supports its use. And as usual, we will be adding something a little different. Today, it's going to be super exciting. We are going to revisit artificial intelligence and see if it is any better at giving us good information on herbs. So that's a fun one. It combines all my favorite topics. It combines technology and herbs and learning. So there you go. We're gonna deep dive into artificial intelligence. Actually, I don't know if I call it a deep dive, but we're diving into it. It's going to be another interesting rocket ship into the exciting solar system of herbs. Please join us today. Before we get into that, just wanted to just quickly tell you I've been teaching for quite a while now on a wide variety of topics. If you like this podcast and want to explore more of my courses, they are available at www.integrativemedicinecouncil.org. That's Integrative Medicine Council, COUNCIL.org. And include a ton of different topics, including my drug herb series, looking at drugs and how they interact with herbs and vice versa, several ethics and safety courses, Chinese medical research, several treatment of condition courses such as arthritis, neck and back pain, COVID, and depression and anxiety. And one of my favorite courses, the Chinese Herbal First Aid Kit. And they're all at a reasonable cost, and you can get an additional 20% off with the code SH20OFF. That's SH as in Spurbs Herbs, SH20OFF, OFF. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about artificial intelligence. Over a year and a half ago, in episode 48, and we're on 88, so this is 40 episodes down the road. In episode 48, we did an experiment during this podcast. We looked at artificial intelligence, AI, and whether it could be useful when researching herbs. At that point, we used valerian, a very popular Western herb, as the subject. I concluded, this is a quote from what I said, I'm really impressed by what it can do. The bottom line is, I think this could be a very useful tool for clinicians in the future, but still needs quite a bit of work before it gets there. So here we are again, a very common Western herb. The reason why I choose common Western herbs is because a lot of the Chinese herbs are not as well documented as the Western herbs, and of course it's very common. There should be lots of information for AI to gather, so that's why I've been choosing very common Western herbs as we go into this. And there have been some major changes in AI since the last time we did this, so let's run the experiment again. And not only did last time when I ran it, I only ran it on one AI because there weren't a whole bunch of others readily available. Bard I actually got, which was the old version of Google's Gemini, today's Gemini. I got the invitation for that, I think the day of, and I couldn't get into it in order to do it. So it's been out for a little while now. So let's see what we're going to do. So today is the last time I asked ChatGPT, which is probably the most well known at this point. So I asked ChatGPT to do today's presentation. This is at least 1 or 2 generations of ChatGPT since last time where we used ChatGPT 3. Today we'll be using the latest version 4. And the reason why I say 1 or 2 generations is because they came out with 3.5, and that was a pretty big leap over 3. So it wasn't quite a new generation, but it was sort of a half to, it's 1 or 2 generations, maybe 1.5 generations since the last time we did this. We will also use Gemini, Google's AI, and not use Copilot, Microsoft's AI, because it's based on ChatGPT. You know, I have a friend who's been really looking into AI for lots of different reasons, and he has a bit of a, he has a website he runs, so he has a bit of a tech background in that. And he said Copilot, even though it runs on ChatGPT, does kind of have its own spin on ChatGPT, but I didn't think, we had a third one. The other one, which we're going to talk about, is the one that my friend really likes, which is Perplexity. So we're going to use that one as well. So we're going to test 3 different AIs today, where the last time we only used one. So here's what happened. I gave the prompt, create a 45-minute professional presentation on saw palmetto herb. That was the prompt. So here's today's experiment. I will, with tons of transparency, be using some of the lines from these AI attempts. These will be taken from several different iterations of the prompt. By iterations means you do a prompt, you see what you get, you tell it how you want it to change, and it changes it, and that's eventually you get to something that's useful. So let's see how this will play out. So first one is saw palmetto and ChatGPT. I put in the prompt discussed into ChatGPT 4, and it put out an outline. And at the end, it said, would you like to continue with creating slides or content or for any specific section? So that's kind of cool right off the bat. It kind of knows what you're trying to do. And even though it didn't give it to you in the first iteration, it's like, hey, just tell us that that's what you want. So I prompted it to please create the slides, and it added content to each slide, though not a ton of it, ending this iteration with the question, would you like me to help with detailed content or provide references for any specific slide? I responded with, yes, please add detailed content with references. And it came up with a 14-slide presentation with references, which always need to be confirmed due to AI hallucinations. I confirmed all references that we found here. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So I'm going to go through the slides given by ChatGPT here, as they are very interesting. It should be done relatively quickly. The first slide is a title slide, and the last is a references slide that says add all the references on the individual slides to it. So they had all the references at the bottom of each slide, and the last slide basically said, well, okay, all those individual references, put it in this slide. So it didn't do it, but it said what you should do. So that leaves slides 2 through 13. So slide 2, titled Introduction to Saw Palmetto, and it actually had a heading, Main Content. Saw palmetto is a small palm tree found primarily in the southeastern U.S., particularly in Florida. Native Americans, including the Seminole tribes, historically used saw palmetto berries for a variety of ailments, especially those related to the urinary and reproductive systems. The herb gained popularity in Western medicine in the late 19th century for treating urinary and prostate issues. Now, I can tell you, after having gone through and researching all this, that is all correct. So what it says is actually really good. Here's the references. So the first reference is from Morton, and it was written in 1977, Major Medicinal Plants, Botany, Culture, and Uses. And it has the publishers, Charles C. Thomas Pub, Ltd. And my comment here is, confirm this is real, but quite old. 1977 is basically almost 50 years ago. So that's very old for reference for something like this, but valid. So we're good. The next one was from Manish L. In 1999, and it is an ancient herbal plants in ancient Egyptian medicine by the University of Texas Press. And I did find this book, but it was published in 1989, not 1999, with a newer version in 2006. I did not find anywhere a 1999 version, and the 2006 version was not by the University of Texas Press. So somehow I got the date wrong. Okay, maybe passable. So that was slide 2. Slide 3 is a botanical description. Serenoa repens belongs to the Erica Ericaceae family and is native to the coastal plains of the southeastern United States. The plant has distinctive fan-shaped leaves and produces dark red berries that contain the active medicinal compounds. Thrives in sandy soil and underbrush, particularly in pine forests and coastal plains. So, I didn't get too much into the growing of this, and I'm not sure about pine forests. I did read coastal plains. For the most part, this seems relatively appropriate. Fan-shaped leaves, it's a palm, so it has those palm-shaped leaves. So I think this is pretty accurate. And here are the references from Higgenfeldt H. in 2001, Botany and Phytochemistry of Saw Palmetto, Serenoa repens, written in the journal Phytomedicine on pages, and it has the volume and the number of the journal, 8.5, and the pages 385 to 387. Here's what I found. This article does not exist. I could not find it with a direct Google search, and when I found the journal and looked at the issue cited, there was no article on Saw Palmetto. Though all the info was correct, volume, issue, page numbers, they were all there, it wasn't Saw Palmetto. So it doesn't exist. I looked it up. I've never not found a paper cited somewhere in a Google search. And I didn't think I used it, but I may have also used Google Scholar search. Never not found a paper where I have all the information. So this is the first time I've never found a thing. And I looked up specifically what it said. Not there at all. Made up hallucination. That's what they call it in AI, hallucination, when they make up content, which they tend to do. So bad. Slide 4. Active constituents. The primary active compounds found in saw palmetto berries are fatty acids, lauric acid, oleic acid, and caprylic acid. Phytosterols, beta-cytosterol, campesterol, and stigmasterol. And flavonoids known for their anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. Again, these are, having looked at the constituents, these are all correct and are pretty, are absolutely, from my research, this is all true information. These components are believed to work together to support prostate health and hormonal balance. Okay, and here's the reference. Vela Navarrete R. et al. This is what it says, 2003, Pharmacological Effects of Serenoa repens in Phytotherapia, which is phytotherapy, and I think it's Spanish. It's actually it's a fairly well-known journal in this field. Again, it has the volumes and the issue numbers and the page numbers. And again, this article does not exist. Did a Google search, looked up Phytotherapia. That's not one that's going to have a lot of other confusing journals, and looked at these pages, looked at the whole journal. This article was not in any of them. Made up. Slide 5, traditional uses. Native Americans consumed the berries for urinary tract infections, reproductive health, and as a general tonic. They believed saw palmetto to be a rejuvenating herb, particularly for men's health, supporting vitality and strength. It was also used in poultices to treat wounds and skin conditions. And the reference is Barrett B. et al., 1999, Saw Palmetto, a review of use, pharmacology, and therapeutic potential in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. Again, it has the volume and issue numbers and page numbers 471 to 42. And, well, this is a trend. The article does not exist. So out of the 5 articles that it has cited so far, 3 of them do not exist. They're completely made up. One had the wrong date, which, okay, you might, if that was the only thing wrong, you might give a pass on, but it's not. And one was super old, and so just not good. And I called it. That's it. Calling it. ChatGPT seems to have fairly accurate information. Actually, I'd say really accurate information. It made up a really good thing. It was a little short for me, for this, because I have probably 30 or 40 slides that are way more detailed than ChatGPT, but okay. The information was relevant, it was there, and it did it out of thin air, so that's really cool. So was able to put together a useful presentation, but too many of its references are fake or wrong, and therefore the information cannot be relied upon, and it completely fails the test. I'm sorry, references are everything. So done. this was not good. ChatGPT is not a good source for herbal knowledge. We'll have to test it again in another year or two and see where it's at that point. But until ChatGPT starts getting its references correct, it's not a viable option. And of course, I extend that out. I mean, this is not herbalism in general is, I think, a little bit more obscure than other things. But if it can't get this right, what else does it get right or wrong? So not liking it. Okay. So let's look at Saw Palmetto and Gemini. So Gemini is Google's version of AI. Again, I put the prompt, create a 45-minute professional presentation on Saw Palmetto herb into Google's Gemini. And again, it created a good, if a little short and relevant outline of a presentation. I then asked it to please create this presentation with references, to which it responded with a short but decent presentation with seemingly useful information with references. However, when you looked at the references, they were all placeholders that said in brackets, insert citation for ... ellipses, whatever the topic was. In other words, there were 0 references, and this constitutes another complete fail. If you don't tell me where you're getting the information from, I can't trust the information, period. If I can't confirm your information, it doesn't exist. So Gemini is another utter failure, based simply because it couldn't do any references at all. So I'm getting a pattern here, thinking, okay, we're not there, I can't do it. So I did do this Saw Palmetto and Perplexity. I did the same exercise for another AI that one of my friends prefers, and that's perplexity.ai. That's the www that you put in, perplexity.ai. So perplexity.ai. Should be period AI. As with others, the initial answer was an outline of presentation, and I then asked for detailed content with references. Well, I would say it might be a 15-minute presentation rather than a 45-minute one. I do this a lot, so I can pretty much judge how long a presentation is going to be. It was pretty good with individual references that linked to the source websites. 2 of the 8 sources were scientific papers, while the others were websites that were appropriate and relevant, like WebMD and Healthline, except for the reference to Amazon for dosing. It actually had, what was cool about the references is they had the pages, you could click on it and it would go to that page. So it was really just an Amazon page with products of Saw Palmetto. And that's what it was using for its dosing, which I guess isn't wrong. I just wouldn't use that ever as a reference. So I didn't go into as much depth as I would have wanted. However, Perplexity was definitely the best of the AIs discussed here, at least as far as herbs are concerned. It had references. It wasn't bad. The information wasn't bad. Overall, I liked it. And if you guys want transcripts, I copied and pasted everything I did here. Just send me an email. I'm happy to send you the transcript of everything I did and what the responses were and all that, so you can kind of see what everything was. But for my money, if I were to ask a question of an AI, it would be Perplexity about herbs. And even then, I would definitely look at it with a fine-tooth comb to see if I trusted it or not. But at least there was one that wasn't half bad. So we'll check it again in another year or two. Not bad, though. Okay, and with that, on AI and Saw Palmetto and herbs, let's get into our thing. That was interesting. I think we're getting there. And maybe Perplexity is mostly there, but none were as professionally relevant as I would like. So let's get into our normal in-depth approach to our herbs. So we're talking about Serenoa, I can't even say this. So Serenoa, repens, Saw Palmetto. And it comes from the family, as was mentioned in one of those slides, Ericaceae. And the species is Serenoa repens, in parentheses, W. Bartram, and then small after that. So remember, the W. Bartram and the small actually refer to biologists. This technically means that the biologist Bartram, W. Bartram, was the first to codify this species, and then it was revised by the biologist Small, and that's what that all means. The medicinal part is the fruit. Other names for this, rather than Saw Palmetto, are American dwarf palm tree, cabbage palm, Juzjong, Sabal fructus, Sabal cerulata, So that's the Latin Sabal cerulata. So it's no longer the correct name, but it is an older name for this plant. The shrub palmetto, saw palmetto berry, Serenoa cerulate, Brahia cerulata, and Corypha repens. So there's a bunch of potential Latin names for this, but the correct one is Serenoa repens. So let's talk about the Ericaceae family. The Erica, see, I keep wanting to say it so I get it better. The Ericaceae family constitutes perennial flowering monocots or plants with fibrous root systems. The plants in this family are all palms. There are approximately 181 genera and 2,600 species. With one exception, they are known by their fronds, large, evergreen, compound leaves. The fruits are usually a single-seeded drupe. This family includes many historically useful plants and products still important today, including date palms, coconuts, ivory nuts, carnauba wax from Brazilian palms, rattans, palm oil, hearts of palm, acai, and several palms used to create alcoholic beverages. They kind of went into a little detail, and I thought it was a little bit more than we needed to know. So history of this. So according to Foster, who had a really nice overview paper on, saw palmetto, native groups throughout saw palmetto's range consumed the fruit as a staple food. In 1575, Spanish explorer Hernando de Escalante Fontaneda, who was around 1530, who lived from 1536 to 1575, was the first known European to record the use of the berries as food by indigenous groups in Florida. At the time of first European contact in what is now Florida in 1513, the now extinct Glade Indians of southern Florida, including the Calusa, the Tequesta, Mayaimi, Jaga or Jobe, and AIS consumed saw palmetto fruits. The Timucua, I'm sorry I'm butchering these terms, the Timucua and Appalachia ate fresh berries. The Alabama, Creek, Miccosukee, and Seminole also consumed the fruits. The Choctaw dried the fruits for winter consumption. This is supported by another paper. Saw palmetto was one of the most important foods for Florida's pre-Columbian non-horticultural peoples and later Creek immigrants. Even today, among the older Seminole population, the fruit is still consumed in moderate quantities, and a sweetened traditional drink called Shiopi Sofki is made from the juice. Saw palmetto was largely unknown by the European and American medical communities until the second half of the 19th century. Foster continues to discuss the first inkling of medical uses. In 1806, botanist and physician John L.E.W. Schutt, S-H-E-C-U-T, who lived from 1770 to 1836, in his Flora Carolinaensis, recommended a cautious approach to consuming the fruits and hinted at medicinal activity, which may have been the result of microbial contamination, given that the alleged purgative effect is not reported elsewhere. This is a quote from that book. The pulp of this fruit is of an uncommon sweet taste, but is possessed of such a purgative quality that strangers are sure to pay dear for the knowledge obtained from one experiment. They are so tempting and pleasant that few can refrain from tasting, and one or two of them produces a copious evacuation and are very apt to occasional gripings or grippings. You know, it's an old word, and I think we pronounce it grippings these days, but it's spelled gripings. I am of the opinion a valuable medicine might be prepared from this fruit. Gripings means cramps, basically, occasion cramps. The first medicinal uses of saw palmetto are similarly elucidated by Foster. The use of saw palmetto as food sparked observations on its medicinal use. Quoting a letter received from Dr. George Wallace of Daytona, Florida, recalling use in the 1850s, excerpted, I can't even say it, excerpted in an article on the evolution of the saw palmetto in the June 8th, 1900 issue of the Virginia Medical Semi-Monthly. J.C. Lahardy, MD of Savannah, Georgia, wrote, indigenous groups and enslaved Africans ate the berries ravenously. With us, the taste is an acquired one. At first, it is almost repulsive, but generally, after a few days, one becomes passionately fond of it. It takes the place of food, is slightly stimulating, and the indigenous groups and enslaved Africans all say that it is an excitant to the organs of generation and a splendid tonic and builder up when convalescing from fevers or other wasting diseases. So that's probably the first mention, like we said, in the second half of the 1800s, one of the first mentions of saw palmetto as a medicine. Other uses. Saw palmetto is a hardy, if slowly reproducing plant, and has had many uses historically and in modern times, including as food, fiber, oil, medicine, wax, and roof thatch, among other economic products. In the late 19th century, a market emerged for use of saw palmetto vegetative material for the tanning industry. Indigenous groups were seen to bruise the stems, then boil them in water and use the liquid to tan hides. Traditional uses. So the PDR for herbal medicines says it was approved by Commission E for irritable bladder and prostate complaints. We've talked about Commission E in the past. Commission E was something done in I think it was in the 80s in Europe. And basically at that point, if an herb wasn't approved by Commission E, I don't think you could sell it in Europe. So Commission E was approved, was important, and they looked at all the evidence and decided which ones did something and which ones didn't do it. So being approved by Commission E basically says there's some evidence to show that it does support these sort of things. Though, as we find out, it may not be, as strong evidence as we may have thought with Commission E. But Commission E approved it for irritable bladder and prostate complaints. Unproven uses include in folk medicine, saw palmetto is used for inflammation of the urinary tract, bladder, testicles, and mammary glands. It has been used for nocturnal enuresis, that is bedwetting, persistent cough, eczema, and improvement of libido. WebMD, we're still under traditional uses. WebMD says this herb can be used for people commonly use. Oh, that is bad grammar. I'll change that up. So, people commonly use saw palmetto for symptoms of an enlarged prostate called benign prostatic hypertrophy, or BPH. Saw palmetto is also used to prevent complications from prostate surgery and for treating other prostate conditions, male pattern baldness, sexual dysfunction, and many other purposes. Drugs.com says saw palmetto has been used to treat symptoms of enlarged prostate, benign prostatic hypertrophy, or BPH, such as increased nighttime urination or decreased urinary flow. Other uses not proven with research have included treating sore throat, cough, cold symptoms, asthma, bronchitis, migraine headache, male pattern baldness, chronic pelvic pain, and prostate swelling, bladder problems, prostate cancer, and other conditions. Mount Sinai adds it may help with benign prostatic hypertrophy, prostate cancer, promote urination, and inflammation. It doesn't promote inflammation, it would help inflammation. So USP's monograph, and we're going to talk about USP in just a second. So USP's monograph says saw palmetto has been used in males to tone and strengthen the reproductive system, and specifically for symptoms of prostatic enlargement. In women, it has been used occasionally to reduce ovarian enlargement and increase the size of small, undeveloped mammary glands. In both sexes, it has been used as a general tonic for genitourinary problems, to increase sexual vigor, and as a diuretic. That paper continues to say, the Native Americans of the Southeast regions considered saw palmetto useful as a nutritional tonic, a use to which the high oil content in the nuts and flesh of the fruits probably contributed, as a diuretic, a sedative, and an aphrodisiac. The steam from cooking fruits was inhaled. This is still the USP monograph. The steam from cooking fruits was inhaled for use in bronchitis and to relieve irritated mucous membranes and as an expectorant. Saw palmetto was largely unknown by the European and American medical communities until the second half of the 19th century. The plant was first considered a nutritive tonic and a useful remedy for relieving local irritations of the mucous membranes of the respiratory, digestive, and reproductive tracts. Over time, it became widely used for the relief of urinary difficulty and pain in men with benign prostatic hyperplasia. Benefit was attributed to an ability to increase bladder tone and reduce urinary urgency, allowing better contraction and expulsion of urine with reduced pain. Saw palmetto also was used for certain urogenital disorders in women, including ovarian enlargement, dysmenorrhea or painful menses, and for stimulating mammary gland secretion. Saw palmetto was also frequently used to relieve chronic bronchial coughs and laryngitis. So that's not a use that you hear a lot about, when just going through saw palmetto, but there are some respiratory uses, some lung uses of this herb. Okay, I mentioned the USP, so let's talk about the USP because this is actually a really important sort of thing. I'm just have a slide or two. I have one slide on this. So we're going to talk about USP stands for United States Pharmacopoeia, and we're using a source from the United States Pharmacopoeia, or USP, and I wanted to take a quick break in our presentation today to briefly introduce the USP. The USP was started in 1820 and is a nonprofit, non-governmental organization that publishes a pharmacopoeia with quality standards for the United States. If these standards are met, drugs and dietary supplements may use the designations USP or NF for national formulary on their product. So when you see a USP, often you'll see a little USP in a bottle. That means it's up to these standards. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, uses the standards for individual constituents as the basis for determining whether or not an ingredient has been adulterated. So while it's non-governmental and there's no laws backing this up, the FDA does use it as a reference, and the FDA can use it to enforce certain laws as well. So the USP is actually very important in the U.S. and they definitely have a lot of scientists, and they have annual conventions where they talk about all these things. And they look at all these quality standards. So it's a big deal. So that monograph was actually a really good source of information for us today on saw palmetto. Okay, let's talk about dosage and preparation of this herb. According to the PDR for herbal medicines, dosage should be a daily dose. A daily dose of 1 to 2 grams of the drug or 320 milligrams of the lipophilic extract, and then it says hexane or ethanol 90% V/V, which is volume to volume. So that's it, and we'll see typical doses are 320 milligrams a day, often and divided. In fact, next one, this is still from the PDR for herbal medicines. Dosages used in studies demonstrated efficacy at 160 milligrams given twice daily or 320 milligrams given once daily. There you go. WebMD says saw palmetto has most often been used by adults in doses of 320 to 960 milligrams by mouth daily for up to 3 years. Now, I got to say, that's the one source I've seen that goes as high as this. Most of the sources are saying 160 to 320, so 960 seems like a lot. And here's the USP monograph. They say for traditional preparations as a tea, 1 to 2 grams per day. As a decoction, bring to boil 1 cup of water and 1/3 the total daily dose of saw palmetto fruits and simmer gently for 5 minutes. Drink 1 cup 3 times daily. As this is a hydrophilic extract process, it contains few lipophilic components, and that's important, especially since we think the lipophilic components are actually the active ingredients. So I would not recommend a decoction with this, but it is done. The next thing is still the USP monograph. Liquid extract, a 1-to-1 herb to extract ratio, or HER, is you should have 0.6 to 1.5 milliliters 3 times daily. As a tincture, 80% alcohol, fresh fruit, in a 1-to-2 herb to extract ratio. Dry fruit, 1-to-5 herb to extract ratio. 1 to 2 the dosage is 1 to 2 milliliters 3 to 4 times daily. So, some of the sources actually say that this is probably better taken as a liquid form and in tincture form, because that's where a lot of the active ingredients are, rather than in pill form, which is how most of it is done. So kind of take that as you will. For clinical trial preparations, again, we're still in the USP monograph. Clinical trial preparations, liposterolic extract, or LESP, 320 milligrams orally once daily, or 160 milligrams twice daily in liquid or solid form, with an approximate 10-to-1 herb to extract ratio, or HER. I love this about the USP. It's all about these extract ratios, and it's one of the issues I have when other people try to dose. They don't give you the extract ratios. They're incredibly important, so this is really good information. So approximately 10-to-1 herb to extract ratio, standardized to 70 to 95% free fatty acids, has been studied for symptomatic treatment of benign prostatic hypertrophy stage 1 and 2. ConsumerLab.com, which I love as a resource if you want some really good direct information. That's it. It is behind a paywall. You do have to pay for it. It's the one subscription I pay for without hesitation because I use it constantly. One of the things I love about Consumer Lab, and we're not going to get into it at all, but they test the products. So like with Saw Palmetto, I think they test maybe with combination products, maybe 8 or 10 different brands of Saw Palmetto. Test them for contaminants. It tests them for it has what it says it has, and gives you a recommendation based on price and what it has in there. It's great if you want to know not just what it does and how it does it and all that, but also which specific products you should buy. I love ConsumerLab.com. Can't praise them enough. So ConsumerLab.com says a typical dose is 320 milligrams per day of extract, standardized to 85 to 95% fatty acids. So it pretty much follows that USP. Another book that we're going to refer a couple times here is The Energetics of Western Herbs, a Materia Medica integrating Western and Oriental herbal medicine traditions. This one is volume 1. That says by Holmes. That says this herb should be used at the following doses in decoction, 4 to 8 grams, which, remember earlier we said 1 to 2 grams, but you're supposed to take it 3 times a day. So that's in the ballpark, I think. Tincture, 1 to 3 milliliters at 1 to 2 strength and 45% alcohol. Holmes notes that it can also be used as a suppository for prostate conditions and as a syrup for treating dry, irritated conditions of the upper and lower respiratory mucosa. So that he really goes into the lung aspects of this. Quality. It was difficult to find anything on what makes good quality Saw Palmetto. However, heavy metal contamination, especially arsenic, lead, and cadmium, is a concern. In ConsumerLab.com's testing of 8 products containing Saw Palmetto, none showed contamination. That's good because I've seen them do reviews and almost all of them show contamination. So the fact that none show contaminations, it means we have a pretty healthy supply. 1 of those 8 did not get approved due to too few fatty acids in the product, but nothing else inherently wrong with the product, which is good. So let's talk about Chinese medical actions of this herb. A source says this herb is Juyei Zong or Juzhong in Chinese. So there is a Chinese name for it, though I tried to look that up in any of my Chinese herbal texts and they weren't there. So even though that's a name, I don't know how prevalent that is. The source from the White Rabbit Institute of Healing goes on to say Saw Palmetto is slightly sweet, pungent, astringent, dry, and warm, and enters the kidney and lung, which makes sense if we're talking about prostate and sexual health. The kidneys are often involved with that, and we saw a lot of lung function, so it makes sense that those would be the 2 big channels here. His actions are boosts Jing, tonifies kidney qi. Both of those could be considered to be useful for BPH as well as potentially for libido. So that makes sense. Boosting tonifies kidney qi, reduces inflammation, and then it has a colon explaining these 3 functions. It boosts sexual drive, swollen or inflamed reproductive organs, infertility, ovaritis or inflammation of the ovaries, impotence, sterility, improved energy, and weight gain. And then its other set of actions is it expels phlegm and supports lung qi. and again a colon in coughs, flus, bronchitis, wheezing, asthma, and catarrhs. So catarrhs are I can never remember what a catarrh is, and I used to have it up here, but it's to do with the lungs. It's an old term. Another source, ChineseNutrition.org, says it is sweet, sour, warm, and enters the spleen, bladder, kidney, and liver. So not exactly the same. It doesn't have lung, and it adds in this bladder, which makes a bit of sense. I don't know about spleen and liver, but okay. The spleen makes sense a little bit too. It describes its actions as, in terms of Chinese medicine, saw palmetto is known for its ability to tonify qi and tonify yang. It also helps to resolve cold and resolve phlegm. So that's its functions. And then there's that book that we talked about, The Energetics of Western Herbs, the Materia Medica Integrating Western and Oriental Herbal Medicine Traditions. Holmes says saw palmetto is somewhat sweet, astringent, pungent, which is another word for spicy, aromatic, and warm, and enters the kidney, bladder, liver, spleen, and lungs. So it kind of has all the same as the ChineseNutrition.org, but adds in that lung again. So he has 4 groupings of functions. So the first grouping, there's a lot here. He puts a lot in these groupings, so hang with it. Grouping number 1, tonifies reproductive qi, regulates menstruation and relieves impotence and frigidity, strengthens and nourishes the reproductive organs, increases hormones and promotes sexual organ development, conception, and lactation. Grouping number 2, tonifies urinary qi, harmonizes urination, relieves irritation and incontinence, strengthens the bladder and prostate, and reduces swelling and inflammation. Grouping 3, tonifies the digestive qi, promotes absorption, and improves weight. Grouping 4, moistens the lungs, promotes expectoration and relieves coughing, dispels wind, heat, dryness, reduces inflammation, soothes the throat and opens the voice, and stimulates immunity. So those are some different perspectives on Chinese medical actions, with my own opinion thrown in there. Comparisons and combinations. Well, generally there weren't any direct comparisons or combinations for this herb in our literature searches. ConsumerLabs.com mentioned the similar functions of beta-sitosterol and tested combinations of both. Now remember, this does include some beta-sitosterol, which is actually a very important herbal constituent. And so they do actually, there are combination products of saw palmetto and beta-sitosterol. So I think, it's an interesting combination here. Contents. So Evans, which is a book on pharmacology, says fatty acids constitute an important feature of the drug, referring to this herb. The principal free acids are oleic, lauric, myristic, and palmitic acids with lesser amounts of caprylic, capric, stearic, linoleic, and linolenic acids. Other constituents include flavonoids such as rutin, isoquercitrin, and others. Phytosterols, including sitosterol, its glucosides and esters, and stigmasterol, immunostimulant polysaccharides involving galactose, arabinose, mannose, rhamnose, glucuronic acid, and others, carotenoids, and volatile oil. So those are the contents. Let's talk about the science. Is there science behind this? There have been many studies looking at the use of saw palmetto in lower urinary tract symptoms due to benign prostatic enlargement. The results have been mixed overall. A recent Cochrane database review looked at 27 studies involving 4,656 participants and concluded Serenoa repens alone provides little to no benefits for men with lower urinary tract symptoms due to benign prostatic enlargement. There's more uncertainty about the role of Serenoa repens in combination with other phytotherapeutic agents. So if you're not familiar with the Cochrane database, it is great. It is a fantastic resource. They have very strict protocols as to what gets into the Cochrane database for systematic reviews. It is considered fairly high-level information, relatively high on the evidence-based medical system. So what it says is usually really strong evidence, and this is basically saying it doesn't do it. So I am, before I did this, I was thinking if someone came up to me with BPH, I'd of course go, okay, well, saw palmetto is thought to really help this. After doing this, I'm like, no, I don't know if saw palmetto really does it. And see, now here's the problem though. We haven't looked at all these studies, and I can tell you one of the faults of these studies is they will look at any studies that have this, that look at these two things, the saw palmetto and the benign prostatic hypertrophy. What it doesn't do is assess dosaging. And to me, dosage is key. So there are 27 studies. I don't know if those were all properly dosed or not. I think they probably were because the dosing seems to be pretty standardized, but I haven't looked at those 27 studies, so I don't know. So overall, I would say this probably isn't looking good for benign prostatic hypertrophy, but that doesn't mean we should take this without reading it more in depth and looking at it a little bit more closely. Retrospective study. So retrospective study is not considered one of the strongest studies. We usually like to use prospective studies. So we construct a study to examine what we want to do. Retrospective study is looking at old records and then coming up with information from that. Retrospective studies are really useful. For one thing, you can usually get a lot of numbers from retrospective studies, and they can really be helpful in figuring out how and when and what you might want to design a prospective study for. But in and of itself, it is decent clinical evidence, but not really strong clinical evidence. So a retrospective study looking at 2,301 men undergoing radiation therapy for prostate cancer showed no difference in outcomes in those patients taking men's health supplements, including saw palmetto, and those who are not. So in other words, it didn't help with radiation therapy. So according to Cooperman, which is from Consumer Labs, he's the doctor that runs that, there have been some small manufacturer-conducted studies looking at the use of saw palmetto for androgenic alopecia, that's male pattern baldness, and other small studies that showed some hair growth in these patients, but they were not statistically significant and were not as effective as pharmaceutical intervention. So basically, this is interesting. It does potentially produce some hair growth, just not in a lot of people, a lot fewer people than would be with often it was compared with finasteride, which is a drug that helps promote, it's not Rogaine, it's the other one, does help promote hair growth. And I think finasteride worked in like 80% and this worked in like 40%, so a lot fewer people and not as strongly as the finasteride. So it had some effect, it looks like, but not strong. But they're small, so we're not sure. Cooperman also says there's no evidence for saw palmetto's use for bladder inflammation or cystitis, chronic bronchitis, laryngitis, and asthma-associated nasal inflammation. The USP monograph, though older, says saw palmetto may have inhibition of 5-alpha reductase activity, alpha-1 adrenergic blocking activity, anti-androgenic and anti-estrogenic activity, anti-inflammatory activity, and antispasmodic activity. So, those all mean certain. So the 5-alpha reductase activity, alpha-1 adrenergic blocking, those are pharmacological activities. It can block androgenic activity, which is male hormones, as anti-estrogenic activity, so it can block estrogen hormones. Frankly, I don't like things messing with hormones, and this is doing a bit of that. So potentially. The PDR for herbal medicines also says saw palmetto has anti-androgenic and anti-estrogenic and anti-inflammatory effects as well. Let's talk about drug-herb interactions. There are quite a few suggestions of the drug-herb interactions between saw palmetto and various drugs, though none appear to have any clinical evidence. Warfarin is frequently mentioned as a potential interaction, though there's no clear evidence supporting this. And warfarin kind of gets this rap. Like, if there's any hint that it might affect, the blood, then it's going to affect warfarin. Warfarin's a very sensitive drug, so that's relatively valid thing, but there's no evidence to really say that it does that. That you will see a lot of warnings like this should probably not be taken with blood thinning medications like warfarin, but there's no evidence. Then the argument to that is, well, it doesn't need evidence. It seems like a likely thing, and we don't want to put our patients at risk, so we're saying it. Okay, yeah, I think with as much use of warfarin, as much use of saw palmetto, especially in that population where that can overlap quite a bit, I would expect some evidence of interaction. So anyways, another common concern is the combination of saw palmetto and oral contraceptives, though again, this appears speculative. While there have been a small number of in vitro studies, so in vitro means in glass, studies showing potential cytochrome P450 interactions or CYP interactions, this is one of the few herbs where clinical trials have shown no CYP 1A2, 2D6, 2E1, or 3A4 interaction. So what we're saying here, so first of all, cytochrome P450 is one of those risk factors for drug-herb interactions. So we're concerned if an herb affects cytochrome P450, it is at much higher risk for a drug-herb interaction because it can affect the use of cytochrome P450 by drugs. And so this one, when done in vitro, and that's why I don't like in vitro studies, it said, okay, yeah, there's a few interactions happening with cytochrome P450. But just because that does that in a test tube, it doesn't mean, and by test tube I just mean broader, just not in animals or in humans, in vivo. So it doesn't mean it's going to do it in humans. This one, they've done clinical trials. They had 20 healthy people in this one trial, and there's another one here as well. And they actually gave them things that to see if it affected these particular subtypes of cytochrome P450, 1A2, 2D6, 2E1, 3A4. 3A4 is the big one that we're worried about. 40 to 60% of drugs will utilize that. And it found that there was no interactions with that at all. So who cares what it does in glass, in vitro? In humans, in clinical trials, it does not, it clearly does not have any interactions. That's useful. So no real drug interactions here that we've seen so far. So let's continue our conversation. Literature search did not find any mention of P-glycoprotein interactions, which is another target for drug interactions. And the American Herbal Products Association's Botanical Safety Handbook puts this herb in interaction class A, herbs for which no clinically relevant interactions are expected. And I agree with that with my research. This does not seem at high risk for a drug-herb interaction. That doesn't mean there aren't concerns. Let's talk about some of those concerns. According to the PDR for herbal medicines, patients with hormone-dependent cancer should observe caution and speak to a physician regarding the use of saw palmetto because of its anti-estrogenic, estrogenic, and anti-androgenic effects. So, maybe. They also suggest the use of saw palmetto with pregnancy and breastfeeding is not recommended due to its potential hormonal effects. The USP monograph says clinical studies indicate that saw palmetto is well tolerated by most patients, with the primary reported side effects being mild gastrointestinal complaints such as nausea and diarrhea. Saw palmetto has not been reported to be toxic in humans or animals. WebMD says saw palmetto is likely safe when used for up to 3 years. Side effects are usually mild and might include dizziness, headache, nausea, and diarrhea. Saw palmetto is likely unsafe when taken by mouth during pregnancy or breastfeeding. It acts like a hormone, and this could be dangerous. Don't use during pregnancy or breastfeeding. Saw palmetto might slow blood clotting. Again, it's speculative. It might cause extra bleeding during and after surgery. Stop using saw palmetto at least 2 weeks before a scheduled surgery. I'll be honest with you, most surgeons, especially in a big surgery, are going to say stop everything 2 weeks before. So I would stop it. A paper looking at liver toxicity from saw palmetto concludes hepatotoxicity from saw palmetto is very rare and cases have been self-limiting upon stopping the herbal. There have been no instances leading to fatalities, liver transplantation, chronic hepatitis, or vanishing bile duct syndrome. And the American Herbal Products Association's Botanical Safety Handbook puts this herb in safety class 1, herbs that can be safely consumed when used appropriately. A systematic review of saw palmetto adverse effects concluded adverse effects associated with the use of S. repens are mild and similar to those with placebo. The most frequently reported adverse events are abdominal pain, diarrhea, nausea, fatigue, headache, decreased libido, and rhinitis. More serious adverse effects such as death and cerebral hemorrhage are reported in isolated case reports and data from spontaneous reporting schemes, but causality is questionable. No drug interactions were reported. Currently available data suggests that S. repens is well tolerated by most users and is not associated with serious adverse effects. The majority of adverse effects are mild, infrequent, and reversible, and include abdominal pain, diarrhea, nausea, and fatigue, headache, decreased libido, and rhinitis, which is just everything I just read. Those are all the cautions. So in summary, we started our discussion today with a look at the current state of artificial intelligence for examining and assessing herbs and the evidence supporting their use. And we found, for the most part, it failed, except with perplexity. From there, we did our deep dive into saw palmetto or Serenoa repens, one of the most commonly used Western herbs and used primarily for benign prostatic hypertrophy, though the evidence doesn't support this use. It has a long history of use and appears to be quite safe. So, based on its safety profile, if someone wanted to take this, I wouldn't object to it necessarily, but I would also explain that it probably won't help. Overall, another interesting herb that doesn't quite live up to the hype, at least until there are more studies. That's the thing about science. It's a stepwise process. So right now, it doesn't look like it's very effective. Maybe there's bigger and better and stronger studies, and it turns out it is very effective. You never know it. I've seen it happen. Been looking at this stuff for decades now. It happens. In our next episode, we will be exploring another interesting Chinese herb, jianghuo, or Notopterygium rhizoma surradix, or Notopterygium root or rhizome. This herb is in the Chinese medical subcategory of warm, acrid herbs that release the exterior under the category of release the exterior herbs. It is helpful for certain types of colds, and especially for alleviating pain and unblocking painful obstructions in many conditions, such as some types of arthritis. And as usual, we will be exploring something a little different. Please join us for this intriguing episode. See you in 2 weeks. Thank you very much for listening. If you like this podcast, please do us a huge favor. Give us a 5-star rating in your favorite podcast app. We really appreciate it, and we thank you ahead of time for even thinking about doing that. And remember, you can get continuing education units and National Certification Commission of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine professional development activities at www.integrativemedicinecouncil.org. Remember, that's council, COUNCIL.org. And don't forget that 20% off with the code SH20OFF. You can always get in touch with me at Dr. Greg at spurbsherbs.com. That's SPERBSHERBS.com, or at our website, www.spurbsherbs.com. And as usual, I have a good long bibliography. Thank you very much.
Spurbs Herbs.
The proceeding was presented by Dr. Greg Sperber. We would like to thank Janelle for all her support and everybody else who contributed to this program.
Janelle.
Timothy
Nick
Dobbins.
Rogers.
Campbell.